At the end of the day, the old versus new world in security is about centralized versus decentralized. So the whole organization is going from kind of a command and control, a top-down sort of statement, annual processes that sort of follow the process, to continuous, agile, adaptive organizations that change as they go, run by independent teams.
Today, we're diving into the intersection of security and productivity in the world of software development. And who better to guide us than Guy Podjarny? Guy is a longtime evangelist for DevOps and application security, and the founder at Snyk, a leading provider of developer-first security solutions. As businesses continue to adopt more apps and tools so they can innovate and build faster, security teams are facing a tough challenge. How do you build a security program that reduces risk without slowing productivity and efficiency? In this episode, Guy shares his insights on implementing security controls that scale and talks about different approaches to measuring the success of your security program. We also get his unique perspective on how buying behavior in security is evolving and what the near future might look like for both buyers and sellers. So sit back, relax, and join us on the ride. All aboard!
I'm your host, Alex Bovey, CEO and co-founder of Conductor One. All Aboard is a new show designed to equip security and IT pros with the tools, knowledge, and practical advice to keep their teams secure and productive. Join me to hear from experts and innovators that are shaping the future of information security. Let's get into today's show.
Good to see you again. Let's just jump right into it. I think one of the things that I've always been really inspired by with you in particular is how you evangelize so much on the shift left movement, in particular around application security. I don't know if it was around before you started Snyk, but it certainly seems like you were either helped create that movement or maybe even invented it. Why is that movement so important? And in your mind, why is that so essential for the security, for the future of application security?
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate the kind words. I didn't invent shift left, but I was saying it actually all the way back in 2002, when kind of in the early sort of AppSec players. And at the time we were saying it, it was still sort of a very waterfall-y type of development process. And shift left meant left in the sort of the sequential delivery of software. And it really predicated on efficiency. We had all these charts sort of showing how it's 100 times cheaper to kind of find a problem during development versus finding it in downstream audit and go back and rework it. And that's true. That's kind of very relevant. And so shift left was always understood as a way to just be more efficient with your time and your work. But I think what has happened really over time is that first of all, the pace of software has changed, and so the ability to sort of keep up with software separately has really kind of gone increasingly out the window. The notion today of being able to secure software from the outside is just fundamentally flawed. You can never keep up. And that's kind of augmented with the fact that increasingly DevOps and kind of agile development, it predicates on independent teams that move quickly and they don't wait on people. And everything around, there's a bit of a chicken and egg, but cloud being APIs means you don't wait for an IT person to provision a machine for you. When you get going, you just deploy. The notion of continuous monitoring versus very, very heavy duty testing and having the testing all be automated and not manual means you don't wait for a QA cycle. You just deploy the software, try to find as many issues as you can, and then respond to problems quickly when they happen in production. So all of that methodology just doesn't work to this notion of stop and I'll audit. And so I think the reality is that shift left is important for starters because of efficiency and because as more software is created, as more things are digital, then being efficient around sort of securing digital is more important, and you have to kind of get that throughput. And then second is because otherwise security is in a state where it either slows down development, which goes against the will of the business, or developers work around it because they're independent and they're really incentivized to sort of shift product value to customers.
Can we click in on the measurement piece of it for a second? Because I think that's something that I find really interesting from a security standpoint. Like when you think about measuring security outcomes, sometimes it is a little bit of, it's like proving the null hypothesis. Like how do you prove that something like an attack didn't happen or like a vulnerability wasn't taken advantage of? And so presumably Snyk is making companies more secure. It's making your applications more secure. It's making you more efficient. Do you think about proving that value to customers, and or is that something that you productize? That's something you talk about in the sales process. Like, how do you think about actually measuring and quantifying that value?
Yeah, no, I agree that like measuring security is a really kind of mythical beast that nobody really has like a perfect solution to it. I mean, I think I'll answer in general and then on Snyk. So in general, I think there's sort of three ways that people measure security. One is they measure the effectiveness of their security program, and that's the easiest thing to measure. That's just a program. You put KPIs. How quickly did I respond to a vulnerability and fix it? How many of the issues they found downstream have been found sort of ahead of time? How many people, how many dev teams are actually sort of engaged and successfully testing versus which ones are not testing. So I think that's very important because you build a security program that theoretically you believe to be the right way to sort of secure your organization. And then you want to see, am I actually properly executing it? And there's a lot to measure there, and those are important measurements. And to an extent, if you don't do that well, then it almost doesn't matter what you do. The second way that people measure security is the output of their security controls. So how many vulnerabilities do I have? How many critical, how quickly did I address them? How the windows, which is good. It's useful because it is also like a relatively easy thing to measure as a barometer of your sort of security posture. The problem is it's not always the best barometer of your security posture. And actually, if you stop to think about it, it's almost incentivizes you not to find vulnerabilities because your sort of KPIs would go. The reality is that people still do it, but they do it more in the black and white. So it's like, do I have like only for critical vulnerabilities? How many of those do I have? Only for two-factor authentication setups, like how many people have 2FA? And those are kind of the outputs of the tools that they have. And I think it's useful, it's just narrow. And then the third and toughest but best measure is the efficacy of their security controls. How well is it actually protecting from attackers? That's the hardest to measure. You can do it through, red team type activity. Like the best thing to do it is through external validation. How many bug bounty reports did I get? How many, red team, coming in? How many issues did they find? Naturally, it's never going to be comprehensive. It's too expensive to be comprehensive, but it is an effective additional sort of spot check for your sort of most precious jewels to assess. And so I think all three are valid, and at the end of the day, combination goes. They kind of go in prevalence from 1 to 3. At Snyk, we try to help on the first two. We don't really do the third as much as we work with customers that do that to just sort of assess. So we talk about definitely, I think our claim to fame is that our security program actually works. Developers actually use the product, and so you actually kind of roll it out. And we work with the customers to ensure they're deployed in all the places. And then second, of course, is we find security flaws in your system, so we help you kind of manage the output of that and try to find the right ones. And then it's kind of, in terms of efficacy, we help with things like, exploit in the wild. Are there exploits in the wild to the vulnerabilities? How many, like again, collaborating when something is found, 0-day responses. But it isn't, we're less in the runtime piece, and so it's less what we focus on. I guess maybe like the last bit that I would say is in the security program and the risk reduction piece, like all of this is about measuring the value we can provide in reducing risk. We also separately provide value in improving productivity of developers. So it's more about how quickly did you fix issues, how much time. And those are more dev productivity measures that some organizations have, some don't. But we kind of take pride at shortening the time it takes. Sometimes it's hard numbers, and sometimes it's soft numbers.
That's great. One of the things that I've been exploring a lot, and I'm curious how much it plays into Snyk's business, is this idea of in kind of old world development, old world security models, it felt like things are very siloed. And so the kind of interface into the security team or the security team into the organization was typically via like a help desk ticket. So I found a vulnerability, I file a ticket that may or may not be addressed in some reasonable amount of time. The idea of shift left, presumably, is more discoverable by developers. They're addressing that issue. We see a similar pattern on the identity side in terms of preventing identity threats upstream of that. How do you think about, I guess, is that important? Is that something that you guys look at and think about in terms of like developer productivity and efficacy is actually, hey, if we can address these issues, it just decreases the number of tickets. You don't have, vulnerability tickets outstanding. And is that something that, plays deeply into the product, I guess, at any sort of level?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the old versus new world in security is about centralized versus decentralized. So the whole organization is going from kind of a command and control, a top-down sort of statement, annual processes that sort of follow the process to continuous, agile, adaptive organizations that change as they go, run by independent teams. And so, we talk about shift left, but maybe the bigger change is the top to bottom,
Yeah,
and
totally.
that's sort of the direction of note. And really, what you need is you need these teams to be able to embrace their responsibility and run with it. And so we focus, we put a lot of weight on ownership, on saying, if like, what do I need to do to be able to own security on developer? It doesn't mean security teams go away, but security teams, what I deem to be the best sort of application security, product security teams, they evolve to see themselves as a platform team. They think of themselves as a team that succeeds by enabling developers to build secure applications. And so sometimes they build things into the platform, like literally, coded in so a problem goes away and doesn't need to be addressed by a developer. And sometimes through an enabler and sort of the tools. So I think that totally applies to sort of authorization as well. And you need to move security to close to the decision. So when a person is making a decision, you need to help them make a secure decision, or not give them the ability to make an insecure decision in a way that doesn't prevent them from creating business value. And so, yeah, we invest a lot in that type of ownership. In the world of developer, it translates. You see customers adding security results into their stand-up dashboards. The whole premise in Snyk on, a security person's job ends at finding an issue and reporting it and assessing the risk. A developer's job ends at fixing the issue. And so if you want developers to use and be successful with the product, you have to go all the way to fixing. And so this notion of sort of independent ownership of the tool, and then providing, of course, security teams the sort of the governance capabilities they need, that's really kind of, I guess, what we drive for.
That makes sense. Can we explore for a second the command and control versus the decentralization movement? Because I 100% believe in that. I think that's one of the biggest drivers also for our business and just what we see happening around identity and access control as well. And I think there's interesting shifts that have to happen there technologically and also just in terms of ownership of the teams. Like one of the things we talk about is, guardrails and centralized policies. So the idea being that, the security team really maybe owns the definition of what secure looks like, or how functionality should be maintained, or in our business, how access should be granted for particular resources, high risk resources, low risk resources, or applications. Do you see similar patterns in Snyk, or are there other shifts that you think have to happen either process-wise or technologically to actually facilitate that decentralization?
Yeah, I mean, I think there needs to constantly be sort of a chain of things that are made possible technologically that therefore sort of simplify someone's ability to do the right thing. And so I think the notion of becoming a platform team, for security teams is to be to kind of find creative solutions to address, or to sort of be able to at scale address a problem that repeats. And sometimes those creative solutions are in the form of actually figuring out a different architecture, for instance, that makes a problem go away, and you build on existing innovation. So like a service mesh is a good example of it, right? Like a service mesh didn't exist before. Like before, the notion of having a programmable place between microservices didn't quite sort of exist, and now it's available. What can you do with it? eBPF is another sort of example for it. The cloud, and just sort of the APIs and the discoverability that you do there. And so a bunch of those things, I'm not even getting into like fancy AI and sort of more elaborate things that you can do. And so really what you want is you want to enable the security team to codify their knowledge and their expertise into this platform. That you want them to have coding capabilities and sort of build those kind of into the system. And so those include either inventing or consuming kind of technology from the right sort of tools providers. And then at the end of that, the last step is governance. And so at the end, no matter what you do, when it's a independent team, some people are going to stray from the pack and embrace those. I really, really like the DevOps journey as a role model for many of these things, and because when you think about it, operations absolutely went from centralized to decentralized, and today we kind of accept it quite well that that developers have a responsibility to build operable software. Infrastructure and app are much more intertwined, more than ever before. But a lot of operational needs went away because the platforms evolved and they became better. And serverless is probably like the easiest example of that. Of just, I'll take away the need to patch your machines because I'm going to take away the management of these machines in the first place, and have that go away. And similarly, they have the paved road approach. And I think that's really where, at the end of the day, there is a zero-sum game that you eventually land in, giving you enough sort of rope to hang yourself with, versus not, right? How many degrees of freedom do you get? So Netflix has this popularized this term, the paved road, where basically, you lure people onto the platform. As a platform team, you build a paved road that has all the right controls of it, but constrain the dev teams. And if you want to go kind of bushwhacking your way kind of off to the side of the road, you can. The paved road comes with a set of specifications that says, well, if you're doing that, then these are all the things you need to satisfy on your own. And then most people opt for the paved road. Like most people go in and they'll work within the constraints. But if someone's really innovative and they want to go off doing it, you're not preventing it. You're saying, well, then you have to take this overhead with you.
Yeah, it's a great model. It's like you can go spelunking in the cave, or you can go off into the jungle in the woods. But like you got to bring a machete, and you got to bring all the you got to do all the extra work on top of it. It's not
think
that
about all
model.
these other things that could go wrong versus like just sort of driving down the main street, right?
Yeah, totally. How much do you see? Do you see any shift in terms of how companies are buying security software and how they're evaluating security software going forward? Like it strikes me that I feel like we see a pretty big shift even from 5-10 years ago, very in the same tune of like central versus decentralized, like the old world, sort of like very centralized decision making, like centralized sales process. You might have a single buyer champion and a single person making a purchasing decision, sort of pushing the software to everyone else. Feels like it's very different today. It feels like user experience matters more than ever. PLG, kind of being able to use a product, matters more than ever. Transparency, docs transparency. Does that, I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
I think the world has definitely changed in terms of evaluation criteria and sometimes path into the business, and even sort of small purchases. I find eventually most security purchases still happen relatively centrally. I'd sort of say that it's, there's a few reasons for that. One is that the security budget sits with security. So the organization has allotted a number of dollars to say, this keeps the organization secure, and has put that in the hands of the CISO or whomever. And so even if the dev team is the one kind of, dealing with a lot of things, it is still, needs to come out of the security budget. And so it's not constant. And by the way, sometimes you see the CISO sitting under the CTO or under the SVP engineering. And so that also happens. But I think, the budget is one. The second is that, there is a lot of security is still around the detect and respond. So a lot of it is still around like understanding what has happened. There is, I think, a merging, or at least kind of a clashing of the worlds of SecOps and DevOps. And so what I think is happening there is that there's an understanding and appreciation that monitoring a system and how it's running, overlaps greatly. If you're monitoring it for resilience and performance versus if you're monitoring it for security attacks. It's not the same, but it is similar enough that all the players in SecOps are trying to get into DevOps and vice versa. And so I see some changes there, but I still find that naturally developers and dev tools like depth, and they care about a specific application. It needs to be really, really good at this stack. Even ops, sometimes it's okay to say like it'll be very, very good for that. Security does need to be able to make statements around a security attacker broadly, and so they require a certain amount of breadth, and that lends themselves to sort of be centralized. And so I see a change. I don't think it'll ever get to exact parity with dev. And I think like with all of my love for DevOps analogies, the key difference in security is that there is a villain. There is someone that is out to get you, that is trying to kind of get in. And so you have to take a slightly more holistic view of all my applications, all the places, because the attacker is going to try to kind of, like water flow kind of through the easiest way in. And so that's so it's the constant kind of balance. What I do foresee is that AppSec and product security and maybe infrastructure security increasingly move into dev, which is really almost like IT moving into dev more than security moving into dev. Just like IT was close to IT security, but wasn't the same. So I see that. I see a lot of AppSec and infrastructure, product infrastructure, especially security, moving into platform teams and sort of the R&D organization.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of the parallel path that we actually see on the identity and access control side is this this munging of IT and security concerns around. Sometimes there's that same sort of platform team, but it might snap a little bit more like security engineering teams, where they're responsible for automating a lot of the access controls around infrastructure, applications, how you onboard it, because
Yep.
IT is similar problems, right? Like IT just kind of can't scale with the constant inbound of like nonstop tickets. They actually don't have the context for how you manage authorization and access control across the organization. You have to push that to the other teams and the people responsible for those applications and infrastructure. And then when you do that, you have to invest in the automation to get there. And so we're sort of seeing a similar play where like IT and security, strong overlapping concerns, particularly as it relates to access control, and then a real focus on automation, particularly coming from like those platform security engineering teams.
Absolutely, absolutely. And look, all of these teams are becoming kind of developers in their own right? So that's just like a technological trend. It's become available, and so the notion of security as code, policy as code, whatever, star as code of you have to codify, you have to automate is the only kind of way to sort of speed up, and it's just more efficient, it's just better. And as we move into the cloud and a lot more things are API enabled and they can be interrogated and they can be auto configured, you see that path. And so every security leader I talk to these days, and I talk to a lot I run my podcast as a security developer, I talk to sort of smart security leaders, and I oftentimes ask, who do you hire into it? And fairly consistently every time I open it is people really cherish today coding skills and engineering skills when they hire into their security team, far more than ever before, and oftentimes more so than security backgrounds, depending on the job.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. Any predictions for 2023? Predictions are things that you would love to see happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think 2023 is a tough year because a lot of organizations are dealing with shrinking budgets, or at least frozen budgets, even in security. And so they have to do less with more while the technology advances continue. And so I do see a lot of push for consolidation, and that's just like a budget element, and to an extent almost a clash. When you want efficiency and kind of cost reduction, oftentimes it biases you towards the centralized and sort of streamlined. And when you want agility and growth, it biases you in favor of the decentralized and kind of nimble and adaptive. And so I think that both needs are clashing in the market right now, which I think hamper a little bit one another. But I guess I would say I think 2023 is a year for sort of sobriety a little bit for a lot of places. Like in security, there have been a lot of purchases that have been based on like a massively subjective kind of good vendor pitch kind of a relationship. And I do see that now, if you want to buy a new security tool, you might need to sacrifice another. I think there's a lot more scrutiny of, well, is this really doing what it says it will? Is this really as important as we thought it is? Because the sort of the infinite bucket of money is not there anymore. So I guess my hope, in general, I think that is a healthy fashion. As someone who much prefers the sort of the building security tools, the security tools that are sort of builders, not breakers, that are meant for practicality versus the sort of the fear mongering. I think that's a healthy service, but I think there's going to be a lot of soul searching happening in the security buyer and seller world this year.
Yeah, personally, I kind of love it a little bit, to be honest, because I do think it really de-emphasizes, to your point, that like sizzle selling, or selling a security product based on you showed me or told me one thing I didn't know. But at the end of the day, you have to figure out how that product really adds like ongoing value and delivers like an ongoing outcome for the company and the business. I mean, it's part of the reason we focus so much on workflows as a part of our product, right? Because it's about managing access and authorization, and you have to operationalize that. You can't just tell someone there's a problem there. You have to actually fix it or prevent it in the first place.
And it's a reminder that like most of the time, if someone breaks into your house, is because you left a door or window unlocked, and it's not the sexiest, but most security breaches happen because of excessive authorization, and kind of too many permissions because of some sort of known vulnerability that has been sitting there for sort of 12 months or 12 years, that nobody sort of did anything about. And they're not as compelling as this like funky AI security or the sort of advanced persistent threat sort of type model or modeling of your service. But oftentimes those are your sort of bread and butter. And so as long as the sort of the whatever the well keeps on giving, then you end up sort of doing both. But when you need to start choosing, and it's okay. Look, security is tricky because of you started this with a measurement question, and I think the challenge with not being able to measure how secure am I means that there's just a lot of subjective room in this industry, more so than in many others. And so people apply their judgment, and sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong, and sometimes they don't think about it hard enough, and now they're basically forced to think about it hard enough, and it's okay. It's all in all a healthy trend, but maybe a slightly tougher year than
It's gonna be, yeah.
before.
It'll be a good focusing year at a minimum for companies, with obviously practitioners and also for vendors as well. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate it, guy. This is a great conversation. Definitely got some good nuggets in there.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode of All Aboard is brought to you by the team at Conductor One. We'd love to hear your feedback. Send us a message at allaboard@conductor1.com. Until next time.